I was experiencing this feeling of it's a woman's hobby but a man's job. I started looking into it and speaking to my peers at other design houses globally, and they said that they were experiencing a similar thing. And then I went on to find out that the statistic of graduates in London is that over 85% of graduates from top fashion schools in London are women, but only 1 in 6 in industry are women. People can still perceive fashion as something that is very dated and frilly and frivolous, rather than an industry that's serious, that drives some of the biggest revenue that we have here in London, in the UK. We always feel like not doing something. So I always feel like not getting up in the morning or not going to the gym. But again, I think it comes back to that element of discipline. And when you implement it into your life and you always say yes, then you're never going to limit yourself of certain opportunities that you might not have had access to if you didn't go. My name is Tulasi Parmar. I'm the founder of Tulasi, a luxury women's wear label that specialises in digital fashion. So I create clothes for you to wear in real life, and then I twin them so they exist in virtual environments such as gaming. This is inspired by my Kenyan Gujarati heritage and what it means to be British, growing up mixed in the UK. Digital incorporation for us means that a lot of the design process is more sustainable than other current women's wear labels. How I ended up in fashion, I guess, is my parents had a retail store where they would retail these like luxurious fur and leather overcoats, particularly in the 80s, and then that trickled into like my childhood up in the early 2000s, where I was surrounded by all these clothes. So I was constantly feeling inspired, and like seeing the lookbooks of new collections come in every month, I think really drove me to end up with a career in fashion. Something that really resonated with me, and something I remember from my childhood, is sometimes a really ugly dress would come in, and I remember having that vision of being like, if I designed this, how would I do it differently, or why did I not like this, or kind of what emotion did it provoke out of me. And that's something that I kind of still explore through my research and design development process through my work. When I was at university, my first year was during COVID. So I lived in a shoebox of an apartment trying to build my collection and what have you, just having moved from another city into London. That was a very difficult experience to navigate because we didn't have that social communication and interaction with other people in the building, kind of being on a temporary lockdown. That was something that really shaped my early experience at university. A massive reason why I went to the university I did was, obviously I picked my undergraduate degree during COVID, and the university I went to really pioneered digital fashion, and I remember seeing how Balenciaga worked with Fortnite, and I really thought that this is where the future of the industry was going to go. So that digital design process is something that I really incorporate within my work, and it has really changed how efficient the process is and how sustainable it is and how easy it is to ideate ideas to clients earlier on, compared to a more traditional and analog craft. My following year at university, we were back in the building. Things has opened up and we're kind of acclimating to a more university typical environment. I ended up going on placement in my second year for a small London-based designer brand, and kind of within my first week of interning, I got scouted based on my technical ability to go and do the costumes for a celebrity tour. This was really exciting because it kind of gave me that idea that I can really make freelancing and self-employment a viable form of income. I was a little bit worried that going back into my third year, I didn't have that CV built or a reputable name on my CV. So I ended up going and working for a couture house here in London / Paris. And that experience was really interesting because I was one of few women on such a male-dominated team and working for a male creative director. This really kind of shaped my understanding of how the industry is really still driven by men, and it is very male-dominated. And I was experiencing this feeling of it's a woman's hobby but a man's job. I started looking into it and speaking to my peers at other design houses globally, and they said that they were experiencing a similar thing. And then I went on to find out that the statistic of graduates in London is that over 85% of graduates from top fashion schools in London are women, but only 1 in 6 in industry are women. So I experienced this disparity firsthand. So when I went back into my third year, I realised that women want clothes made by women for women in mind. So during my final year, I then started building my collection in a way where it would contribute towards my brand and kind of help lay in the groundwork to kind of launch myself as soon as I graduated. I was fortunate enough to be one of the first students on my university startup incubator, so that also helped me build and lay in the groundwork again to hit the ground running for when I graduated to officially launch in September. So I launched my brand in September, had my graduation ceremony in October, and we're now kind of 6 months on in that process of building a label really early on. Balancing the creative aspect with the more administrative task can sometimes feel really difficult. So I remember in the early days of when I launched, it felt really creative and hectic, and I was riding on so much momentum. And I'm now in a kind of phase of my brand where I'm doing more administrative tasks to kind of help, again, laying that groundwork, whether that's applying for grants or other opportunities with other publications. That's been one of my focuses at the moment. But something I'm starting to notice is there's like a pattern within the cycle of creativity and admin. So it almost ebbs and flows in the design process. So I think although I'm in a more administrative stage at the moment, I think in a couple more months, as I'm doing another digital showcase and then launching another collection in September, I think then that's when the creativity kind of picks back up and kicks in. So sometimes the juggle can feel quite tiresome at times because you don't always want to be doing admin, but as much as sometimes you don't always want to be creative because sometimes you feel like you're pushing the narrative for your collection. But it's a balance, and I think one of the most things about this process is that I'm grateful for the opportunity to be on this journey. I think not everybody has the opportunity to do something like this, or I think sometimes it's a matter of conquering that fear of what's going to happen, what if it goes wrong, what will people say. But I think once you kind of get out of that cycle and immediately bloom into doing what makes you feel fulfilled, I think that's a massive game changer in how you look at the process and how you deal with the task at hand. Digital fashion is 97% more sustainable than physical fashion. It uses 3,000 tons less of water. So knowing the statistic, for me, it's a matter of kind of building a hybrid design process, because at the end of the day, we're not going to lose physical clothes. That's something that we use to dress us in the real world. But I think there's a matter of us having a focus on our social identity in spaces like the meta, in Decentraland, in virtual environments that could be built through Unreal Engine 5. I think it's a matter of being prepared to cater for when the rise of that comes through, but also the rise of Web3 and dressing avatars that exist in virtual spaces, because we will end up caring, and we slowly almost do, care about how we look in virtual spaces just as much as we care about how we look in our physical spaces. So if you look at social platforms like Instagram, sometimes that identity is something that isn't even real, but it's a public persona of how you look outwardly to others through like a very voyeuristic lens. So I think something that I'm kind of integrating through my brand is being ready for that rise and that kind of take off in the virtual avatar sense. But also it's something that I build within creating the physical process. So for me, I can see how something looks on my screen by using software platforms such as Chloe 3D and Blender to build these virtual assets, to work out pattern layout, to see how I can not necessarily implement zero waste strategies of fabric, but less waste and thinking about using less physical material. So through these digital softwares, I can also then see how it looks in different colorways, and I can easily quickly render different colorways out and pitch this to a client. So a lot of my income at the moment comes through doing custom pieces and one-offs for some very special clients of mine. So something I do through that consultation process is I liaise back and forth with them and say, are you happy with this colour as well? And then I show them, let's say it's a jacket with 2 different colour palettes. Sometimes it'll be a matter of doing it one way or inverting it so it's the other way. Or sometimes it's then a matter of then saying, this is what it looks like in the digital. Here's some physical swatches that kind of pair with that. What do you think of that as a piece going forward? And it also helps because then it's like they can see what it looks like, and it also ensures that they're happier with the final result than if I just made it and they were like, oh, like I don't know how I feel about that colorway anymore. Something I've not done of yet, which I'm slowly starting to build into my process, is kind of building it on a virtual avatar of themselves. So if it was a reoccurring client that I had, and there's one that immediately comes to mind, we work back and forth quite a lot to build her certain pieces, or even like a special colorway that's not in the collection. Would it be a case of building her an avatar that looks like her, and then seeing how the jacket fits and almost building the avatar in a way where it has her proportions? And that way, would it be a case of then printing off the pattern and then cutting it, rather than kind of having that process separate? I don't know, but that's something that I'm looking to build within the brand, because at the moment I'm using a lot of the digital fashion aspect as PR or for marketing or consultation with clients, but eventually I want to build the ecosystem in a way where it's like you will buy the physical asset and then you will get the digital asset automatically, and you would hold on to both of these pieces simultaneously for as long as you had one or the other. Something that I'm seeing is there's a difference within generations of how adaptable they are to new software. So something that I find is that my generation are really adapting and comfortable with the digital fashion element. And this is really interesting because I would say a lot of the physical pieces I create appeal to more 25 to 45, even 50-year-olds, because I think they play on that element of quiet luxury. But then that digital element almost appeals to, I would even go as early on as 13 to 25-year-olds, where people are more considerate of how they look in gaming spaces rather than investing a piece for how they look in real life. So that is something I'm kind of acclimating to at the moment. I think the industry is responsive to this digital incorporation. And I think it's a very exciting space, because I think at the end of the day, the physical pieces still, without this, maintain their value. But it's just a really special element that makes sure that my process is as sustainable as it can be, because I think this is a really important conversation at the moment to make sure we're aligning with these United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and that is somewhere where I see myself positioning my brand. This disproportion in the fashion industry still being male dominated really influences my work in terms of silhouette. So something I like to play around is like really masculine shoulders on like a really feminine silhouette. That's kind of aesthetically where I gear the brand, but also in terms of how I position myself as the founder behind my brand and the spaces I involve myself in. I love to go out and network in very female-oriented networking groups within London. So one of my most recent things is that I pitched to Richard Branson and Simon Squibb through the Ring Doorbell at the Virgin Hotel for International Women's Day. That was a really exciting morning because it was a community filled with female founders, and you get to meet other women and kind of listen to their struggle and also understand why they founded the brands that they have, and you start to see that it's a similar pattern in the industry. So that event was hosted by 2 female co-founders who are building a financial literacy app for women to help them kind of gain more control over their personal finances. I think one of the statistics is that women will lose out on over £800,000 through poor financial investment or kind of handling of money. You might have to check that statistic, but something along the lines of that. So I think it's really telling of how we almost need to kind of armor ourselves with this knowledge to make sure that we make more informed choices. And I think it's always really nice to support other female-led brands. So in terms of my creative voice, as I've kind of grown in industry, I think it's really changed in a sense of very early on, I think I was a lot more shyer and reserved than what I am now. So I think I'm quite secretly introverted at home, but my public appearance is quite extroverted. So I think I still had that apprehension, especially in the early days, of being like, oh, like I don't want to say that, like I don't want to stand up for myself. And this is that fear that I was facing more so in industry rather than doing my own business and being self-led in my journey. Because when you're so young, when you're 19, 20 and kind of finding your feet in the industry, you're so scared on, well, if I chase them for this late invoice, are they never going to book me for work again? If I ask them for interest on the late invoice, am I going to never be booked for another job? I think the other thing that a lot of women and men early on in fashion are victimised by is there's this fear in industry of women and men not wanting to speak up on the fact that we're not getting paid very early on in our career, whether that's through unpaid internships or design assisting roles. And I think that's because we know that there's no other way into the industry without doing those unpaid positions. And I myself have done them in my youth, very early on. And I understand that there's that apprehension to speak out and say, well, why aren't you paying me? Because my work is just as valuable as someone else's. And sometimes you can even see that it's not a matter of age as to why you're not getting paid. Sometimes it's just a matter of lack of funds in the creative arts. I also think I see it from a founder's position now, and I can understand why they would be more apprehensive to pay talent, because there's not as much funding out there for creatives, let alone female founders or those from Asian or Black backgrounds. So I think knowing that information, you can kind of see why it's difficult for companies to be able to afford talent, to be able to deliver the massive responsibility they have. But at the same time, something I'm really passionate about is not taking on interns or what have you unless they're being paid, especially if they've graduated. I think it's a matter of difference when they're a university student and they're looking for experience and they're still on their degree, because they're still receiving maintenance funding and what have you. But I think there's a real shift in when there's somebody who has graduated, because at the end of a degree you're not supposed to come out unemployed or working for free. You're supposed to come out with a career. And I think this is a problem that the industry faces. There's so many graduates going out there and they're not getting the positions they deserve, or that they're going to men first because it's a male founder, then it's a male studio manager, and then they're going to pick that small percentage of men that do study fashion, they're going to pick them next to go into industry, and it almost maintains it as a boy club. And that's not to say that these boys or males aren't talented when they go out into industry after they graduate, but I also think it's very telling that it's a very pick and choose club for how talent is hired throughout the industry. I think it's like when you look at other creative sectors, it's the language that we use around the sector. So when you think of a man who cooks, you think of him as a chef, but when you think of a woman who cooks, you kind of think of her in that more traditional housewife role of baking. And I think, again, it plays into that idea that it's a woman's hobby but a man's job. And that's something that we see across all sectors, not even just fashion as well, or the culinary arts. I think it affects each industry, even media, in its own way. In terms of the doors that are available to be knocked on and opened, I think the doors are there, they're just harder to knock on, and they're just harder for you to have the door open to you if you do knock, because sometimes even if you're somebody like me who's persistent and who is talented in one department or another, I think that's not enough anymore. I think it is a real case of who you know, not what you know, because I think there's so many people in industry who might not have the technical background that I've had through my university, which has more of a technical emphasis, but they've procured a student or a graduate from a place where it is more artistically driven, but they don't have the technical expertise to be able to carry that through. So sometimes you see it being a case of nepotism rather than talent. And I think this is something that predominantly women are just really suffering with in the industry. But I think a lot of female designers, especially when they pitch to other people in industry that aren't from a fashion background, so that could even be if you're a woman in fashion looking in the like angel investing or VC space. I think people hear fashion and they think whimsical, soft, fairy tale, very dainty, rather than a design aesthetic that could be a lot harsher or contemporary in its approach. I think people can still perceive fashion as something that is very dated and frilly and frivolous, rather than an industry that's serious, that drives some of the biggest revenue that we have here in London, in the UK. You know, we have so much talent come out of London, and I sometimes think it's just really undervalued. Looking at other artists that have gone to try and raise investment in industry, or even conversations that I've had about my business when certain VCs have asked what I do, just out in networking, I think one of the things I would say as a piece of advice is know your financials, so know your numbers really well, because I think when people ask you about sales or how much you're looking to raise for what amount of equity, I think being really quick and on it with those answers and knowing your business on the back of your hand makes other people in industry understand that you're serious about what you're doing. Even if you are and you're not voicing that correctly, I think it's really important for women to kind of bring that on and incorporate that into the way that they speak to others in networking environments. One of my biggest pieces of advice I would say is to always say yes, because you never know what's going to come of a situation. So a couple years back, or maybe even a year ago now, I was invited to a fashion mixer at Soho House in Balham, and this was long before I had my membership. And I remember somebody I met there with my friend ended up going on to invite me to a founders base networking event for people of Asian heritage. So I remember going to that, and then through somebody I met there, I then ended up in more like female founded networking spaces, and then through somebody I met through that, that's how I ended up getting a fellowship at Soho House based on my work in the creative arts. So it was a very full circle moment for me. But I think it really shows like you never know what you're going to get out of an opportunity if you just go. Because I think if I never had gone that day, just because I wasn't feeling like it, I never would have had so many other things happen or made certain friends that I have now along the way. Or even doing this interview today, oddly, actually. So I think always say yes, and just don't be afraid, because I think we always feel like not doing something. So I always feel like not getting up in the morning or not going to the gym. But again, I think it comes back to that element of discipline. And when you implement it into your life and you always say yes, then you're never going to limit yourself for certain opportunities that you might not have had access to if you didn't go. In terms of social interactions that led to work, I believe that just being a kind, good-hearted person is the fundamental of all of it. And you are the face of your brand. So something that I realised I feel like a little bit later on, and more so recently, is like at the end of the day, I am the face of my brand and I'm the one who goes out there and represent it. So if I speak badly to somebody in any sort of capacity, that's how they're going to perceive my business. We're one of the same, not two separate things. So I think it's really important to think about how you speak to other people, because I think there's that saying where it's like, then they might not remember what you said, but they're always going to remember how you made them feel. And you know, I was bullied when I was a lot younger, and I always remember like how that made me feel, how other people made me feel about myself. And I don't remember what they said, but it's the feeling that I remember, and that's terrible more so than anything. And I think that if you go into a place where you speak negative intention, then it's going to kind of come back and bite you, because people also always remember. And I think also the industry is so small, and you never know, if you say something inappropriate to one person, they might tell someone else who could have been your biggest client or investor or what have you. So it can always be quite damaging. Something that really shaped me really early on in industry is seeing how founders of other luxury labels spoke to other people on their team in a very negative and abusive way. And I remember thinking at the time immediately that if I had my own brand and business, I wouldn't run it this way. It goes back to that thing, like, you never want to make somebody else feel like they're less than. So people are always going to make mistakes. And as much as that can affect you or deadlines or what have you, at the end of the day, it's an accident. As long as somebody's not intentionally trying to do something that's like outwardly horrible, I think it shouldn't drive a reaction of hatred. And I think company culture is really important to how things get done. So if you're in a culture where you're like fearful and anxious to come to work every day because you're worried about how you're going to be spoken to, well, nothing's going to get done. And then it ends up being a cycle of, you see the founder being angry and then the staff are angry, and it kind of goes round and round and round. And that was something that I saw that I just was like, I'm never going to implement that into my brand or my business, which I've now gone on to build. So as I go on to do more of like my first hire or have somebody in full time, I want to make sure that there's that relationship of them not feeling a certain type of way because they've made a mistake, or them not feeling like they can speak to me about something, because that aversion to be open about something that you've noticed, but being fearful that it's going to strike like a very nasty reaction from your boss, I think that's something that I would never want to incorporate within my brand. And it's something that you also see a lot of other female founded businesses carrying with them, because they've had that experience in the industry and then they've come back to it and they want to build something that's a little bit more softer and more compassionate, but still meeting that delivery of a deadline or whatever it is that they need to meet without it being like an aggressive and hostile workplace. Something I love the most about what I do at the moment, being a founder, is the freedom that comes with the role, and also how much I've grown in my own self and my own personal being. So something you have to learn through being self-employed in any industry is discipline, because when you realize that nobody's coming, the responsibility is entirely on you. So then that's a matter of looking over and looking after your own personal well-being, in a sense of making sure you go to the gym and eating right, to help kind of give yourself that mental clarity to be able to deliver and execute not only the administrative tasks but the creative tasks at hand as well. I think that element is one of my favorites, and also I personally don't being like told what to do all the time, but I don't know a lot of people who do, so that's kind of why my career journey has really resonated with me the most so far. I think going to the gym and eating healthy really helps my mental clarity. So when I was younger, I actually used to eat really unhealthily. So I used to eat so much chocolate. I would finish off like a pack of 6 crisps in a day. The fact I'm slim is remarkable. But I now put more of an emphasis on going to the gym and eating right, because I think I can really tell how it really shows through the way I think. So otherwise I get brain fog and I kind of get bummed down, and you kind of lose that element of discipline, because I think if you're not disciplined in one element of your life, you won't be disciplined in the area of locking in with your work and kind of delivering what you need to. A little bit more of an unconventional one is just going outside. I don't know if that is unconventional. I think going outside and exploring London for me makes a massive difference. So walking around a museum, if I'm having a day where I'm not feeling really creative at all, it kind of opens my eyes and my kind of, I guess, like my neural structure to create and build more ideas. For me, I think going to museums and different art galleries really makes a massive difference, because even if they're not fashion specific, looking at oil paintings or even other mediums of art really influences what you do, because it helps you think about that creative journey, or you see the research and ideation behind why another artist created what they have, and that kind of helps influence that neural pathway to create something new and beautiful in a different medium. Doubt is something that you're inevitably going to feel. So no matter what you do, even if you're having a good day, you're always going to have that voice in the back of your head telling you that you're not good enough. But for me, I kind of make that voice as small as possible. And if I'm ever having the odd day like that, I really make sure that I'm recognizing that what I'm doing is helping other people. So I like to be really mission-led in my work. So whether that's through sustainability or gender equality, I think those are two elements that really drive what I do. So even if I'm having like an off day where I feel like the creative vision isn't what I want it to be, at the end of the day, I know it's going towards a greater good and bettering the planet. Today we're here in the studio. We're just going to be filming a little bit of the behind the scenes, talking about my process and kind of giving you guys an insight into the production on my new collection. So at the moment I'm just going ahead and developing my next collection for the show this September. At the moment I'm working on one of the jackets that is going to be in the collection, and I'm just shortening the initial hem of the pattern, and then I'm going to go ahead and trace everything off and see. But I'm very excited about this new collection. My next collection is called Genesis, and it's all about my journey in faith. It's like a very spiritual process for me, even just being an artist in itself. So it's really nice to kind of tell that story through my work, kind of incorporating the idea of like creation and what it means to create as an artist kind of throughout my practice. But also then like aesthetically, it still has like my Kenyan Gujarati heritage play about into it, and kind of that idea of what it means to be British, being mixed race. So like playing around with like classic British features. So this jacket itself is a trench, so it kind of stays true to its like original design and kind of its technical features, being like a very British garment, but then kind of exploring my other side of my heritage with like fabrication and materials. So at the moment I'm just tracing off one of the patterns I've developed, just kind of cleaning up and making it a little bit neater overall, just making sure that everything's like on the grain line, and that it's straight and that it's lying flat. I think sometimes I can find my like initial practice is really quite messy, but then it's really nice to just kind of clean up and almost like make the patterns more professional overall, and kind of just make sure everything's neat and tidy. You can almost like see there's like so much development that's gone on underneath, and then it's all just about refining that. I work in a shared studio space. It's a really nice location. You find that there's like a lot of other designers and other artists that work in here, as well as other people in industry on each floor in the building. I feel like this place has a lot of history, and it's just really nice to see other pattern cutters and machinists work in here as well. So somebody who's also in the studio, he's like very well trained in bespoke tailoring. So it's really nice to get that type of insight if there's ever a question or query or something that you don't know how to kind of go about it. It's really nice just seeing that there's so much of the traditional craft left over, and it's always really just nice to learn from other people in industry. Sometimes when I'm doing more administrative things, I think it's okay to work from home, but overall I really enjoy being surrounded by people, so that always makes the process more enjoyable, and it kind of just makes you feel that you're surrounded by like-minded individuals. It's really nice to see that everybody in the space has like a different specialism. So some people are really good at production, leather work, machining, pattern cutting, so there's like a lot of skills in the studio. It's really nice to see. In terms of quiet luxury, I think that there's a real drive at the moment where the industry and aesthetically it's shifting towards that, because I think people are very tired and of the very tiresome waiting for a drop to buy like really fast fashion pieces that they know aren't going to last. And I think in a financial sense, people would rather invest in something that's going to last instead of spending £50 on something that's going to last 3 months and then eventually kind of damage or pill and not look as nice as when it first started. Something I'm really passionate about and that I personally have is like a very nice curated like capsule collection. And that's not necessarily even pieces from my own brand, but also incorporating sustainable brands or other young designers where you know the quality's there and it's going to last, rather than having a wardrobe that's filled and inundated with so many fast fashion pieces that kind of just look cheap overall, even though it's ended up being something that's been really expensive, where you've just bought loads and loads and loads and loads of pieces, so you can have more outfits. But I'm very passionate about the fact we have a washing machine and you can just wash something and it's fresh again, and you can rewear it. That's something that I kind of think about with my wardrobe, that it's not embarrassing to rewear something to an event that you've worn before, instead of just this idea of, oh, you need to buy something new, when you can just like look after the clothes you've had and treat them well. So a lot of like bigger luxury pieces, like say something in my own brand and collection, like I have a couple fur jackets. I have a few fur jackets actually, but those would obviously be something that's dry cleaned, but then I wouldn't have, let's say if I had more ready to wear pieces, those would be machine washable and friendly for the consumer who's bought them on a more wearable and ready to wear occasion to wear. You need to make sure that they're made from a material that's like easy for the consumer as well. There's a balance between the two. I think a lot of young people are really much more conscious about where it's coming from. So I think through having the internet and through having social media has become a new form of a news outlet, right? So we can see what necessarily might have not been initially documented on television. So you can hear instantly from somebody on the other side of the world through talking to them online about the conditions that they're living in. And I think we have more of an understanding now of where things are coming from and how they've been made, whereas before, through no fault of the consumer's own, those older generations didn't have the access to knowledge or the knowledge of where these pieces were coming from. But I also think there's just been a massive shift in how things are made. I think a lot of products in the last 20-30 years have become more and more and more mass produced abroad, and dependent on child labour and slavery, rather than produced in in-house production or made within Britain. So say if you're a London label, made within Britain, to help reduce and be more environmentally friendly on fossil fuel costs, and thinking about that added impact on sustainability with transport compared to fast fashion brands and what have you that are out there at the moment. With my own contemporary peers, I think it's a mix of fast fashion and luxury. So I think a lot of people I'm surrounded by chance through the industry is other creatives. So I think it's that understanding of, we have the knowledge of what we should be buying, but we can't always afford it. So I think something you will see in our generation is a lot of people will buy staple products and then they'll invest in more luxury things. So it might be like a black tank that you can rewear more and more and more than like a typical fast fashion piece as a basic staple, but then you'd invest in more slightly more expensive sustainable items to kind of balance. The more you become educated about it, the more frustrated you get, and I think that really shapes buying habits for sure. Sometimes I think the industry can feel really oversaturated for sure, but sometimes I think it also only feels like that because we're only exposed to that saturation. So when you step out of London, the market's really not that saturated at all. Like, we're one big city surrounded by so many other places. So I think it's also making sure that you stand out in a saturated market. So making sure that you're doing something aesthetically different, in terms of your mission-led driving factors, making sure that you're doing something that stands out from the crowd. So for me, I think aesthetically and in terms of the digital incorporation, I think I'm doing something really innovative and revolutionary there. But I think it all depends. Like, I also think it's what you tell yourself. So I think when you get caught up in your own head, you can be like, oh, like I'm just another brand in this like massive like pool of fish in the sea. But I think it's also then realizing that you're like the rainbow fish out of all of that. I don't know if you remember that. There was that book when we had growing up about like the rainbow fish and like how that fish was like different. And I don't know, I went on a tangent, but yeah. Well, I think for me the dream is to have like one of the biggest women's wear labels that pioneers the digital revolution. But I take it one step at a time. Like, I know that sort of thing isn't going to come overnight, and if I want to be a big player in the industry, that I know I've just got to keep working hard at it, and eventually I'll get there. And to those people who are like, oh, that dream's like so big, like it's always worth giving it a shot, because you never know. And I think so many of those other big brands that are now big, they were once in the exact same position that I'm in now. So we all start from somewhere. Yeah. Thank you so much for listening. I hope what I said was insightful or interesting in one way or another. And yeah, please check out what I'm doing, and you can follow the brand at Tulasi Official on Instagram. That's TULASI Official. And I'd love to connect with all of you. So please check out what I'm doing. Like, comment, subscribe, all of the classics. But yeah, that's that.